Hello and welcome to Your Schools. I'm your host, Lynn Turner Fitzgerald. My guest today is Dr. Lisa Stroman. She is a visitor to Billings in January for some pretty important public information. Lisa, thank you for being here. Welcome to Montana. Welcome to Billings.
Thank you.
And you may notice that Lisa's an attorney and a psychologist and really specializes in social media, the impact it has on children. Am I getting that about right?
Yes, absolutely. And the mental health implications.
Right. How big a problem is it?
We have a huge issue. I've been practicing for 23 years, and I will tell you in the last 5 to 6 years, we've seen a massive increase in suicides in kids, depression, anxiety, panic disorder. So it's a very big issue that we're not keeping up with.
When we're talking, what age are we talking here?
So right now we have in the U.S. a national average of kids getting their first device handed to them by a parent at age 6. And it's very early. It's too early developmentally for them to have it. First viewing of...
With internet access?
With internet access. So what happens is parents tend to they'll upgrade their own devices, and then they hand them the old device knowing that it doesn't have cell service. But what parents don't always remember is that as long as there's a Wi-Fi connection, they can access the world through that device.
And they are.
And they are.
All right. Do they ever grow out of it? I mean, these little kids, this is their world, right?
Well,
what do they expect then when they become 30 years old?
Well, it can certainly exacerbate. So I've been working in the field for so long that I've had conversations with millennials, Gen Z now, and what you see and what I've always called is this technology acquired X, right? So technology acquired ADD or technology acquired depression. Like, I really don't know whether or not these kids generally would have developed some of these symptoms that we're seeing if it weren't for the technology infusion at such young ages.
How do you fix it?
We have to roll it back. We have to understand the science. There's a lot of research on it. We know that there are structural damage that's occurring, meaning the gray matter and the white matter are decompensating in our young children.
This is actual physical brain
brain decomposition. You will see gray matter atrophying in these kids that are using what I call kind of junk technology, right? If you think about a food pyramid, you know, we should eat grains and veggies and all that stuff. And at the tip of that, you know, we can have like a few candies here and there. Really the play kind of technology that kids are on should be considered like that. It should be very minimal. It should be less than an hour a day, depending on their age, in my opinion. But we're seeing kids are online 6, 7, sometimes 8 hours a day in these kind of junk social channels, and it's damaging their brains.
What's the end result of that? That's terrifying.
Well, I always say to people, like, if you look at somebody who has a substance addiction, so if somebody comes to you and they say, you know, I'm going to stop drinking alcohol, you wouldn't expect, if they tell you that on Friday, that on Saturday their brain is healed and they're great again. You're going to have to look at that as a 12-month, 18-month process where that neuroplasticity in the brain comes back online and it's healed. So we have to do the same for our children. If they've gotten to a place where you're actually seeing the brains that are damaged or they're acting impulsively, those kind of things, then we've got to come back and say, all right, let's start healing and let's wind that time back, get them into creative channels, cognitive thinking, offline behaviors, go camping, go hiking, those kind of things, play music, those things.
Well, it seems to me that it gets really complicated because if you remove a device from one child, right, they can have it 1 hour a day, all of their friends have devices. This child is going to be very isolated.
It definitely changes it for them. And I think that I've been very honest with I'm a parent. I have a 15 and 16-year-old, so I'm in this with everybody else. Right. My children don't have social media. And I say with the most loving heart that they're odd kids. They don't fit in with their peer group in the same way. And now my 16-year-old who's a junior says, I appreciate that I didn't have it because I didn't have to deal with all the drama and I didn't have to get through that. My 15-year-old freshman, he's a little girl crazy, and he every day wants to ask me if I'm going to let him on, you know. So I've got two different children at two different developmental stages in, you know, different places on it.
So are 15-year-olds finding dates on the internet?
Oh, 15-year-olds find a lot of things on the internet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Call me naive. I don't know.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's so many different apps out there. You know, for adults, there's Match.com, there's Tinder, there's all
Right.
these things that we do for dating. For kids, they have these other apps that they use that are, you know, one that's called Fire, and that like you can, you can kind of give somebody energy, and you want to, you know, make them feel better about themselves. The kids will go on that. They're using them as digital dating apps and connecting with other people. It's
So the
not good.
creators of these platforms are making money doing this.
So my goal in working with the kids is teaching them that they are not using these devices and these apps as a product, that the product is you as a child, and that you're being used, and that they're selling all of this data that you're generously giving to them. And it's you're eroding your own privacy.
Yeah. Well, with so much exposure, how, well, I don't want to sound not too naive here, but is there any way to recapture your privacy?
I think that the concept of us having privacy is no longer something that we can expect anyone in our society. I mean, even those folks that go and live off grid, and I have friends that go buy land and have hundreds of acres, then they go live off grid. If you're going to connect vis-a-vis a telephone or a cell phone or things like that, that's open to observation through channels and third-party data apps and things like that. So it's very, very hard nowadays to be completely off-grid and have total privacy.
Who's amassing all the information?
Big tech,
Tech.
is doing it, yep. And it's a big business, and it's billions
Worldwide,
upon
I'm
billions
sure.
of dollars globally.
Okay. What are they doing with it?
Selling it.
Yeah.
They package it and sell it.
Well, and they use it to influence us too, don't they?
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, you go shop for a mattress online, you've got mattress ads coming out your ears.
Even if you have a cell phone device and you're talking to a friend about a mattress, I would suspect that you will find that you will have an advertisement in your phone later.
That's just creepy, isn't it?
It is creepy, but it happens.
Yeah. How do you protect yourself?
So for me, I keep location services off on my own phone. I make sure my microphone is disabled. Like, I do all of the things I possibly can. You know, I'm not doing anything crazy, but it irritates me that it's a gamification of my life.
Yeah, I know.
In situations like that.
Right. Well, what do you see moving forward? It just seems so bleak to me, what these kids are facing.
So I think that if we look at it from a developmental perspective,
Okay.
if we can go upstream a little bit, and we can go back to how do we talk developmentally to parents that maybe are in the hospital just having a baby. We all remember once you leave the hospital, they hand you the baby, they give you a bag, sometimes a cup, and then they send you home.
Yep.
In that bag usually is a diaper and some other things that are in there. What if we actually gave parents information at that time that from 0 to 2 years of age, any screen time, even television screen time,
Right.
will create developmental delays in your children? We scientifically know now that those little infants, if they're presented with a screen, will be delayed at 2 and 4 years of age.
Now, does that include a television? Is that
It includes a
any-
television.
Really? Okay.
So their brains are so malleable, and they're so in need of that attachment and that connection from a physical person. So if a child cries, and I'll give you the scenario, cries because they're hungry or their diaper's wet or whatever it is, if you have what happens now, a lot of times parents will have a baby that cries and lights automatically turn on in the baby's room so that parents can stay asleep. The baby now is distracted by the lights and now is not going to get their core need met by a human being. So we are outsourcing our humanity at that very young age. And it's because we don't typically know, people aren't psychologists all the time, so they don't know how we're taking that attachment and we're giving that up as parents. So if we can start there and understand that we can change that system and really get parents and people understanding, like, human connection, human contact, eye contact. That's what our children need. And then we can start to educating our kids. And that's what I've dedicated my career to, is how do we create digital citizens? How do we educate them to be the stewards in their own space?
What is a digital citizen?
I feel that for kids, understanding how the system works, understanding from a social emotional perspective how we can use technology as a tool, not as a toy, use it as a tool for goodness, not for evil, and understanding how we can create empathy between each other, even with the devices in the room with us. But that we have to prioritize people and relationships before we do the technology.
Well, what are the choices? So you take away a child's device. What do you replace it with?
So in our household, we've always said you have to have two things mandatory. You have to have a sport and you have to have a musical instrument. And the musical instruments aren't always great, but it wires the brain in a great way, right? So have something that's offline that the kids can do that is balancing that time that they're spending behind screens. Because nowadays, even schools are going one-to-one on devices. They're putting
Right.
our kids into these educational forums, which are creative and cognitive and critical thinking skills. But the blend into that social part is so easy for them. That's the challenge.
Well, let's talk about the child who may now be 8 or 10 years old. This child grew up with the device. It's become a part of their life, a very important part. How do you intervene? Is it cold turkey? Do you do it slowly? How? And honestly, it has to be if a parent is willing
Good point.
to do that.
Right. I think that's wise. I tell parents all the time, you have permission to say no, because they don't always know that. And I think that's the best piece of advice I give parents. It's not your job to be their friend, it's to be their parent. But if you have a child that's already immersed in it and say they're spending a ton of time, you need to do an assessment first. You need to understand what their technology use is. So if you're starting at 6 hours a day, to get them to the reasonable hour of no more than 2 hours a day, then we have to really kind of wind that back. If you go cold turkey on those kids, oftentimes you get violent acts, temper tantrums. It's a real withdrawal that they go through from a neurochemical standpoint. And so parents tend to get into situations where CPS can get called. There's a lot of things that can get very violent in those situations. So having done this for so long, to me, I call it a digital detox, right? And so we have to really go through and do it in a measurable way, help parents understand how bad it is, and then give them tools to how we unwind it, which is if you take it an hour back every day, you start taking the devices out of the bedroom, just kind of bookend the morning and the evening so that they have offline time, then we can kind of control it a little bit better.
Well, so are there programs online, or here we go, online, that can walk a parent through that process? You have written about it, I'm sure.
I have, yes, I've a couple of books. I've got a book called Unplug, which that book really is a very quick primer that I wrote for parents for this purpose, talking them through how to measure the time that they're on, how to reduce that time, how to understand the symptoms, the emotional, behavioral, all of the things that they need to know about. And then my recent book was Digital Distress, which is about Gen Z. And that's really about this whole generation that has grown up not knowing anything but growing up online. And it's just a different generation of kids. And so we have to respect the fact that there's never going to be a day that they wake up and can't say, hey, Google, or hey, Siri.
No, right.
And so we have to respect that they need to understand how to use it wisely. And we are the stewards in that. And even if we don't agree with it or we didn't grow up with it, we have to help them understand how to do that.
Takes courage, it sounds like.
Courage, a lot of grit. A lot of times, I tell my kids, I'm here to make sure you're happy, healthy, and safe. They disagree that number one's being followed all the time. I ask them if they want number three to.
You failed on the happiness thing,
right.
Mom.
And I said, do you feel safe? Because that could change too. Right.
Oh, good. Well, what kind of future are we looking at then? Where are these going to be humanitarian people? Are we going to have a humanitarian society? Or have we all just kind of drilled down into our own little universe?
Well, I think that tech and big tech itself is really trying to create this kind of metaverse online world where we're all disassociated from each other.
To the benefit of them?
To the benefit of money, dollars, and to them.
Okay.
Yeah. And if we keep people isolated and we keep them ignorant to what it's doing to our system and our families long term, they win. So that's why I've focused so much time on the kids. I want them to be empowered to understand that they are the most powerful cohort in history. They are, if they come together, the strongest and the most powerful voice against the tech industry. And if they stand up and say enough is enough, we want this to be different, they can be the stewards and the leaders in the space.
Because really, there's very little regulation with these big tech companies.
There's a lot of money behind it.
Yeah.
And we've got legislators that don't understand. We have legislators that have controlled money and dollars, and so it's calculated to me how it happened, right?
Well, let's talk suicide
Okay.
with young people and how technology is influencing suicide.
Well, you mentioned you've been in media for a very long time, and in the media.
Yeah, radio was black and white when I started.
Well, media when you started probably had, I mean, we've had an agreement not to talk about suicide on television
Oh, yeah.
and media,
Yeah,
right? There's
yeah.
acts that were passed.
And you know, there was even something that they used to call a community standard. It's very ethereal, but it was somehow understood that you didn't violate the community standard.
And that was created because we knew when we talked about it that it would create what could be called contagion suicides or affiliated suicides.
And now, what are those?
Meaning that if someone's talking about a suicide and you're struggling yourself with depression or some sort of mental
Right.
health issue, it gives you the idea, kind of this inception of,
Okay.
maybe that's a good way out. If this person did it, maybe I could do it.
Okay.
So we had standards around that so we wouldn't talk about it. And then social media came along. And there's no regulation, there's no rules. And kids started talking about it, sharing it, and really influencing one another in it. And so to me, that was kind of breaking that wall down. And now we have to talk about it. To
Yeah.
your point, you know, we have to say what's causing it, and what's allowing these kids to look at it as a decision-making process whereby we might say to a friend, hey, I'm really sad, you're sad too, why don't we make a pact and take our lives together?
Does it take on sort of a glamorous tone?
I think it takes on a tone that where kids are feeling bleak about their future and they feel that they don't have any power, so it's a hopelessness and a helplessness. And when they get to that point, and all you need is just a small bit of energy towards your life could be changed forever. So one of the biggest issues that's impacting suicide today is sextortion. So kids are going online, they're befriending people that they think are other teenagers that are like them. They're getting convinced to send naked pictures of themselves. And when that picture gets sent, now all of a sudden that person starts demanding more pictures or money from them. And they say, if you don't do it, I'm going to tell your parents, I'm going to tell all your friends, I'm going to send it to your school. And the truth of the matter is those people that are hacking into these kids' lives are doing that. And so think about a kid who's already struggling, and now they know that their life is over because they have a naked picture of themselves circulating among their entire community.
Do you think there ought to be something in every school curriculum discussing these very things, not necessarily the suicide, but the influence that social media has and the power that you as an individual have to walk away?
Absolutely.
And to make your own decisions.
Absolutely. I've created a career on going out and trying to talk to people, educate them. I've written a K through 12 program for kids. Like
K through 12?
Right, kindergartners, right? Like I've written, you know, I'm like Kevin Costner. I'm just building it. You know, I've got all this pain and this suffering in my clinical practice, and I'm like, how can I help?
Yeah.
So to me, the best steward would be if the school mandated, the family went through it, That's what we're here in Billings talking about, hoping that we can get city council and the schools and the people together, that we're getting the families the help that they need, educating everyone, and doing it and mandating it through the educational system, because we know the kids have to be there. So we can kind of force education in some ways, but we can also give them real information and help if we do it the right way.
Right. Well, and then kids, it seems like their self-worth is sometimes very often tied up with who their image is online. And they're being built up or torn down by individuals they don't even know.
Absolutely.
They've never even seen them. And how is that legal? I mean, how are these companies even legal?
Well, it's like a whack-a-mole situation, right? So
Yeah,
you might have an app
exactly.
that's up there, and parents come back, they take it down, and then a new app forms, and all they do is change the name. So the most famous one you asked about, kids and dating online.
Right.
There was a pro app called Yubo, and so kids would use that and use it as a dating. It was basically dating for teens, and then all of a sudden parent groups found out about it, they shut it down, and then all of a sudden a new app called Yellow came out. It was the exact same thing, even like similar color and everything else. And so it's very hard to shut down what the consumer world is offering to our kids. It's like an all-you-can-eat buffet. So if you don't teach kids you shouldn't eat certain things, right? If you eat this, it's going to make you sick, right? If you eat too much of that, right? So we have to start talking in a way that the kids understand and get them on board to want to do that as well.
Well, good luck with that.
Well, here's a great example. If I go into a high school and I ask these kids and I say to them, how many of you have younger siblings? And they raise their hand. I will say, hold your hands up high. And I said, I want to ask everybody here who has a sibling younger than them, how many of them would you want to be on social media? And hand to God, Lynn, 100% of the time, every single child has taken their hand down.
Wow.
So that's when I said we have to have a peer program.
Yeah.
We have to have a mentoring program
Yes.
where peers are educating peers, because they know it's wrong.
Yeah.
They know it's hurting them, and they don't want their kids, their siblings, to have the same pain.
Right.
So that's the goal.
But are the older siblings weaning themselves off social media, or?
So in most families, no.
Yeah.
Right? In most families, what I see is this kind of isolated world where the parents are struggling with stress from work. They come home, they're trying to do dinner. If their kids are quiet and occupied.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter what age, honestly.
Right.
If the baby's quiet, life is good.
Life is easier.
Life is easier. So let's put the baby in front of a screen and go do something else. Well, and parents do have a lot of stress. I get
Absolutely.
that. It's a tough time. And most of them are both working. So it's a difficult time, I think, to have, a real challenging time
Right.
to have a family. Well, if you were, how would you approach this then with a child who's 10 or 15? Well, there's a big difference there, but what kind of conversation do you sit down and have to open the door to the possibility of changing these habits?
So typically when I talk to younger kids like that, I always say to them, I make the assumption, right? It's not an if, it's a when has this happened to you? So I'll say, how many times or how many friends have you had that have been dealing with these issues? And I'll bring up cyberbullying, or do you have a
Yes.
friend? So I just assume that it's already happened. In the US, we have what we know now is that kids are exposed to pornography on average by age 8. So chronic viewing begins at 11. So I just assume most of my kiddos have been exposed to something like that, which is disturbing,
Yeah.
but they don't know how to talk about it. So I just say, hey, if you've had a friend, how have you handled that? What have you done in this scenario? And then once I have that conversation with them, it opens the door, and I'm like, that's a lot to handle at your age. Have you talked to a teacher about it? Do you have a parent you can talk to? How are your friends handling it? And then I have to kind of unwind and say, like, I wonder how much training your friends have in this space of like helping you through managing these situations.
Right.
Do you need help in that scenario?
Right.
So once I figure that out, it's giving those kids the tools and the permission
Yeah.
to share those wounds and those things that have happened with them.
So let's say it's a non-clinical setting, it's a family setting. find the person that the child trusts the most to start the conversation?
So with families, I typically say to them, pick a news story or pick a story or make up a story that says, you know, I was at work today and one of my colleagues came home and said that they had this issue with one of their kids where somebody sent a picture to them without them asking. It was really upsetting. Has that ever happened to any of you guys?
Okay.
So pick some of these scenarios
Yeah.
and then introduce it in the family table, you know, try to re-engage having a family
Some of
meal.
these scenarios are so far out there, it'd be hard to think them up.
Right.
And
Right.
where do you find the good scenario to open the conversation with?
Right.
I mean, no, it's horrifying, the pornography aspect of it and the suicide aspect of it. There's got to be some good in it somewhere.
Well, we are able in a global economy with technology to open our worlds in places that we could never be. So if you think about where kids, you know, might grow up in a situation that they're lower SES and they don't have the opportunity to go and travel the world, you can put a VR headset on that child and you can take them into Nepal. You can take them into all of these amazing places and like walk them through communities. It's a beautiful thing that tech can offer us, but with good comes evil.
Right.
And so we have to just understand where that line is and how to teach our kids to recognize what I call kind of a tricky person, because everybody's a stranger online.
Yeah.
But you know, there's bad actors, and
A tricky person.
so I always say tricky people.
I like that. Dr. Strovan, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your good work. I
Thank
think
you.
it's going to help a lot of families and a lot of students and a lot of teachers. So again, I want to thank you for being with us. And thank you for joining us on Your Schools. We'll see you again next time.